Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a fairy tale, but with the very real, very grimy world of the actual Middle Ages. Picture this. The air smells like smoke and wet straw. Somewhere, a baby is crying, a dog is barking, and there's definitely something foul in the gutter. You're not riding a white steed in shining armor. You're trudging through knee-deep muck in shoes made of wood and hope. And here's the twist. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing our sleepy little time-traveling community from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The thing is, a lot of people romanticize the Middle Ages. Maybe you've seen those quaint tapestries or wandered around a medieval fair with turkey legs and velvet hats. You might think of shining knights, castle banquets, courtly love, and dragons. Okay, maybe not dragons exactly, but close enough. The truth? Forget everything Hollywood told you. The real Middle Ages were about survival, not storybooks. You wake up in a place that's cold even in July, and your first thought is whether rats chewed your boots in the night. That's assuming you even have boots. For most people, shoes were scraps of stitched leather or bare feet, toughened by years of trudging through fields, dung, and disease. You're not a knight. You're not even a squire. Statistically, you're a peasant, one of the 85% of the population who lived not in castles, but in one-room wooden huts that leaked in winter, smoked in summer, and stank all year round. Romance? Your love life mostly involves praying your spouse doesn't die from a tooth infection before spring. And health? That's a good one. Medieval Europe wasn't just dirty, it was biologically reckless. Fleas were your roommates. Water made you sick. You drank ale because it was safer than the well. The town's open sewer, also called a gutter, ran merrily past your door, sometimes freezing in winter and thawing into disease soup by spring. You didn't have soap. You had ashes. And historians still argue whether anyone regularly bathed at all, or if that was just a luxury for monks and madmen. Your diet? Let's call it functional. Pottage, a watery stew of grains, onions, and whatever was edible and not moving too quickly, was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Bread was coarse and dark, made from barley or rye, sometimes stretched with ground beans, sometimes with sawdust. Yum. But hey, don't go sneaking into the Lord's forest for rabbit or deer. That's poaching. And poaching gets you branded, flogged, or hanged. Possibly all three. One quirky record from the 14th century mentions a man being punished for stealing 3 squirrels and a hedgehog. It was not considered adorable. Your clothes were mostly wool. Itchy, damp, untreated wool. No elastic, no washing machine, no dryer. You wore the same thing every day, and layers didn't mean fashion. It meant survival. Underwear? Rare. And if you were really unlucky, you'd share your tunic with fleas, lice, and whatever small wildlife moved in overnight. Now say you decide to go for a walk through your village. That walk is more like stumbling across uneven paths filled with animal droppings, refuse, and mud, so thick you might leave a shoe behind. If you're lucky, the mud is just mud. The village pigs helpfully roam free, so it's always a gamble. And don't think you can escape indoors either. Most houses didn't have chimneys, just a hole in the roof, if that. So, the smoke from your tiny fire hung thick in the air, making your eyes sting and your lungs wheeze. You cooked over that fire, slept next to it, and sometimes accidentally were the fire if your clothes got too close. Safety regulations. Adorable concept. Average life expectancy for men? About 24 years. Women got slightly more. 33 if they survived childbirth. It's not that people dropped dead on their birthdays, but illness, accident, war, famine, or just falling into the wrong kind of mud pit could end your story early. There was no real safety net, and definitely no ER. Historians still debate whether this short life expectancy reflected widespread death or just a higher infant mortality rate skewing the numbers. But either way, you lived knowing that life was fragile and death was never far off. And yet, here you are, breathing air filled with soot, surrounded by strangers, probably infected with something you can't pronounce and definitely can't treat. You don't have antibiotics. You don't even have toilet paper. What you do have is a vague sense of anxiety, a bloated sense of piety, and a prayer that you'll get through the week without contracting dysentery. On a brighter note, no one expects you to smile for pictures. You shuffle outside, blinking against the pale morning light as the cold air bites at your face. It's not just cold, it's sharp, like it's trying to punish you for existing. You try to ask someone for help, but the moment you open your mouth, the problem becomes obvious. No one has a clue what you're saying. Worse still, you have absolutely no idea what they're saying either. Welcome to medieval England. Population. Confused. You thought you knew English, but this isn't your English. The words are twisted, tangled, and weirdly sung like everyone is part of a local theater production of Ye Olde Confusion. The peasants around you are speaking Middle English, a language that sounds like it's been chewed and spit back out by a Viking who read too much Chaucer. You might catch a word here or there, something like bread or help, but mostly, it's a mush of sounds that refuse to settle into meaning. You spot someone who looks cleaner, maybe even a little noble, and think, aha, maybe they'll understand me. You approach them hopefully, only to be met with a haughty stare and a stream of rapid-fire French. Brilliant. You've accidentally wandered into the Norman upper class. Since the conquest of 1066, French has been the language of the nobility, because of course the elite needed their own way to ignore the peasantry. Panicked, you run toward the church. Surely, someone here will help you. A priest, maybe? You enter the dim sanctuary, half choking on incense, and approach the first monk you see. He opens his mouth, and out comes Latin. Not the chanty, relaxing kind, the headache-inducing kind that sounds like the beginning of a spell you really hope isn't directed at you. So now, you're stuck, surrounded by people you can't understand, and who can't understand you. It's a communication nightmare, and not the fun, dreamlike kind with floating pigs and talking furniture. This is the kind where you can't ask where the toilet is, or even what day it might be. And you really want to ask what year it is, but there's no polite way to pantomime. What century is this? Without looking completely deranged. Historians still argue about how widespread trilingualism really was, whether the clergy, nobles, and peasants were as linguistically separated as the records suggest. But for you, in this moment, the divide is total. You're an alien with no translator, a toddler in an adult's body with no one to help. And worst of all, you can't even curse out loud without accidentally offending someone's entire lineage. One quirky historical tidbit: swear words did exist back then. Oh yes, The peasants were especially fond of phrases involving saints, devils, and creatively blasphemous combinations of livestock. In fact, using religious terms casually could land you in serious trouble. Say, "by God's bones," too loudly, and someone might drag you to the church court. It wasn't just language you had to navigate. It was holy landmines of vocabulary. Of course, not being understood has consequences. If you can't explain who you are or where you came from, the locals fill in the blanks themselves. And medieval imaginations? Not known for being charitable. You must be either a spy, a demon, or a lunatic. Possibly all three. Someone offers you a bowl of gray liquid, pottage most likely, but you hesitate. You try to ask what's in it. They blink at you. You gesture to your stomach. They nod solemnly and hand you a spoon. Fantastic. You're about to eat something that could be onions, or snails, or both. The more you try to adapt, the worse it gets. You mispronounce a common name and offend someone's cousin. You try to smile, but that's taken as mockery. You nod at the wrong moment in a conversation and accidentally agree to buy a pig. One elderly woman even makes the sign of the cross and spits near your feet. Good to know your presence is so warmly welcomed. And if you're still clinging to the idea of finding a helpful monk with a library of Latin to English flashcards, let that go. Education is for the privileged, and books are rare, handwritten, and in languages you still can't read. The idea of learning the local dialect over time sounds nice until you realize your average life expectancy is about the same as a modern house cat. Eventually, you resort to pantomime, pointing, nodding, acting things out. You're one charade away from miming, "I am not possessed by demons." But you can't shake the paranoia that even your body language feels foreign here. Maybe your hand gestures mean something rude. Maybe your posture looks rebellious. Maybe blinking too much means witchcraft. Communication in the Middle Ages wasn't just about words. It was about trust, suspicion, and knowing your place. Say too little, and you're secretive. Say too much, and you're a heretic. And don't even think about laughing at the wrong moment. You don't know which saints these people pray to or which superstitions they live by. You don't want to find out the hard way. You find a quiet corner and sit, exhausted from trying to speak, to listen, to just belong. You stare at your feet, the mud caked between your toes, and wonder if maybe staying silent is the safest strategy. For now, at least. Because here, in this world of strange tongues and stricter rules, silence might be your best defense. After a long, awkward day of being stared at, muttered about, and almost exorcised by an elderly nun, you finally retreat to a field edge, out of the way, somewhere between the dung heap and the chicken pen, and you sit there, quietly hoping no one asks you any more questions in French, Latin, or aggressively mumbled peasant dialect. But just as you're about to close your eyes, someone else sits beside you. She's wearing a coarse linen dress, stained with something suspiciously dark around the hem. Her hair is tied up in a scarf, her hands are calloused, and her face looks like it's seen about 30 winters. Though she might only be 20, she's a medieval woman. And in this world, that means one thing: hard labor, silence, and pain stitched into every moment of her life. You think you're having a rough time? Try being her. See, being born female in the Middle Ages wasn't just unlucky. It was basically a centuries-long endurance challenge with no reward at the end. Your life isn't your own. You belong to your father until you belong to your husband, or if you're particularly unlucky or pious, to the church. The idea of independence exists only in fever dreams or folk songs. And the chores? Oh, the chores. Let's say you're a peasant woman. Your day begins at sunrise, assuming you even slept. You're up, fetching water, stoking the fire, cooking whatever your household can scrape together. Then you're off spinning wool, brewing ale, weaving cloth, milking goats, wrangling children, cleaning tools, feeding pigs, digging in the fields, and just to keep things spicy, birthing a child every other year. Historians still debate whether noble women had easier lives. Sure, they didn't do the same grueling labor, but they were often treated like bartering chips, married off at 12, confined to lonely castles, and expected to produce heirs and keep their mouths shut while their husbands went crusading or philandering. So, it's really just a matter of which cage you lived in. Now, if you're a married woman, and you probably are, because spinsterhood is basically a scandal, then guess what? Congratulations! You're now expected to bear children as a regular sacred duty. And yes, childbearing is considered divine and honorable, but also terrifyingly fatal. You probably know someone, maybe several women, who've died in childbirth. In fact, people expect you to. There's no modern medicine, no pain relief, no sterile rooms with beeping machines. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress with a midwife muttering prayers beside you, hoping the baby turns the right way and doesn't get stuck. If something goes wrong? Too bad. C-sections were rarely performed, and when they were, it was usually only after the mother was already dead. In 15th century Florence, about 1 in 5 women died during childbirth, and that's just recorded cases. Many more likely faded away silently, buried quickly, while the rest of the village muttered about God's will and handed the baby to a wet nurse. Because of how common death was, pregnant women were urged to write wills as soon as they started showing. Picture that. Preparing a legal document as you sew baby clothes. That's not nesting. That's negotiating with the reaper. And still, you work. Through pregnancy, through breastfeeding, through grief. There's no maternity leave. No one's coming to bring soup. You just keep spinning, stirring, tending to animals while your own body bleeds or breaks or simply gives up. The religious culture doesn't help. Much of your societal role is backed by theology, particularly the writings of St. Paul, who, let's just say, didn't exactly have a feminist bone in his body. He's fond of phrases like, women should remain silent and submit to your husbands. And because biblical texts are considered law, you don't get to argue. If you're caught speaking out too much or showing too much independence, you risk being labeled unruly, dangerous, or worst of all, unholy. Want to become a nun? That's your one real way out. But even that path is narrow. You'll need a dowry, permission, and the willingness to live in cloistered silence for the rest of your life. Which might sound peaceful, until you remember medieval nunneries weren't exactly health resorts. And if you ever break your vow of chastity, let's just say history has very little sympathy. And for women outside the peasantry, life isn't much kinder. Wealthy women may have fancier gowns and servants, but their bodies are still currency. They're married off for alliances, locked into dynastic power games, and often die just as young, just as worn out, just as forgotten. Still, one quirky detail. Some medieval women found subtle ways to push back. Midwives wielded quiet power. Wise women dispensed herbal medicine. Market vendors ran side hustles and occasionally sued men in local courts. Yes, really. And behind closed doors, some noble women kept detailed journals. windows into inner lives far richer than the world allowed them to show. But those are the exceptions. Most medieval women, yourself now included, are crushed under an unrelenting cycle of expectation and loss. And there's no escape. Not through work, not through childbirth, not through prayer. The system is rigged, the rules are written in holy ink, and your suffering is seen as a kind of moral purification. You glance at the woman beside you. She's silent, just watching the road. There's a baby on her hip, and another dragging at her skirt. Her eyes are dry, her face unreadable. You want to say something, anything comforting, but you still don't share a language. So instead, you just sit there with her in the fading light, because even in a world built to break women, there's something unspoken in shared silence. The crying starts before dawn. It's not yours this time. It's coming from somewhere nearby, a thin, reedy wail that cuts through the chill of the morning air. You roll over on your scratchy straw bedding, more haystack than mattress, and realize someone's baby has died. Again, you hear it in the mother's sobs, in the low murmurs of neighbors trying not to sound too shocked, because truthfully, they aren't. Not really. Here, in the 14th century, the death of a child is as routine as winter frost or toothaches that never go away. You want to feel outraged, to shout that it shouldn't be this way. But this is how the world works now. If you're born during this era, you better be lucky. Statistically, you won't survive to your 5th birthday. 1/3 of all children don't. And those who do, their odds don't improve much before the age of 7. You could trip into an open fire, catch a fever, drink tainted water, or just fade out during the night from a stomach bug. That's not tragedy here. That's Tuesday. People say children were more disposable in the Middle Ages. Historians still debate this. Some argue that parents were emotionally distant to protect themselves from grief. Others point to heart-wrenching letters and tombstones that suggest otherwise. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Maybe the grief was just quieter, more worn down from repetition. And it starts before birth, too. Medieval women don't know about fetal alcohol syndrome, so they drink heavily. Ale is considered a daily staple, safer than water. Pregnant or not, it's what you drink to stay alive, and sometimes just to stay warm. There's no folic acid, no prenatal care, and certainly no pamphlets with smiling cartoon fetuses. Nutrition? A bad joke. Most peasants subsist on whatever they can grow or trade. A bit of grain, a few root vegetables, maybe some cabbage or beans. Milk is a luxury. Meat? Rare, unless it's from something that died unexpectedly. Babies are born into bodies already starved of vitamins and strength. The moment you're born, the clock starts ticking. If you're lucky, you're breastfed. If not, if your mother died in childbirth or there's no milk, you're handed to a wet nurse, assuming one's available, or you're fed animal milk, which often leads to stomach infections. Infant formula hasn't been invented yet. Everything's trial, error, and prayer. You lie swaddled tightly because people think it helps bones grow straight. You're barely able to move. A fire crackles nearby, but it's also a hazard. Children falling into hearths was common. You don't walk for long before someone dies of something. A rash becomes a fever, becomes a seizure, becomes a funeral. Even the noble families lose their children. Money doesn't buy immunity. In fact, wealth sometimes backfires. Richer diets might involve meat stored too long, wine cut with leaded water, and over-reliance on medical remedies involving herbs, lizards, and leeches. Some things, like measles or whooping cough, don't care about social class. They just kill. One eerie fact: across medieval Japan, nearly half the population died as children. Yes, half. 48% of all children didn't survive. That's not a number you carry lightly. It means siblings raised each other. Parents named multiple children the same name, just in case the first one didn't make it. And death doesn't pause for grief. There are more mouths to feed, more firewood to chop. You bury your child quickly, within a day, maybe two. There are no photographs, no keepsake footprints in clay, just a shallow grave and a whispered prayer. Maybe a cross, if someone has the time to carve one. Even play is risky. Wooden toys are splintered. Games involve rocks, sticks, or wrestling in the mud. Nobody's sanitized anything. Infection waits around every scrape. And then there's famine. When the harvest fails, which it does often, everyone suffers. But children suffer first. Their bodies don't have reserves. They go quiet. Stop running. Lie still and watch the rafters. Sometimes they swell with hunger. Sometimes they shrink until they disappear. And because no one understands vitamins, the symptoms confuse everyone. One child goes blind. Another won't stop crying. Another won't stop sleeping. And yet, you see children laugh. They run barefoot. They chase chickens. They steal turnips from neighbors and get caught. They sing little songs while shelling peas. There is still joy, even here. Children adapt. They always have. One small boy pulls faces at you until you smile. Another tries to show you how to skip a stone. There is mischief. There is wonder. But the truth remains. Their world is not safe. There are no pediatricians, no vaccines, no warm bath and bedtime stories. Their lullabies are often prayers. Their toys are sometimes bones. The line between life and death is as thin as a cough. One quirky belief from the period: that teething could kill. People blamed fever, convulsions, or even death on a baby's emerging teeth. Treatments ranged from honey rubbed on the gums to, no joke, bleeding the child or applying leeches. You try not to imagine that as you watch a toddler gnaw on a stick with pink cheeks and glassy eyes. And here's the most sobering part. Most of the people you meet are survivors. They already lost siblings. Their mothers lost children. Some of the women walking past you are only still standing because they were the lucky ones. And they know it. So when you see someone holding their baby a little tighter, or hear a mother softly humming over a cradle made from a basket and fraying linen, remember? It's not just affection. It's defiance. It's fragile hope in a world where nothing is guaranteed, and everything can be taken in a heartbeat. You sit there, surrounded by laughter that could vanish by morning. And for the first time since arriving, you feel not just out of place, but deeply vulnerable. Because here, childhood isn't a phase, it's a battlefield. By now, your boots, or what's left of them, are clinging to your feet mostly out of loyalty. You're limping through the village path, dodging chickens, and trying not to make eye contact with a goose that clearly hates you. And it hits you, slowly and inevitably. You're not just lost in time. You're also stuck at the bottom of the social barrel. You, my friend, are a serf. Not a knight, not a scholar, not even a proper peasant freeman with some loose change and a nice shovel. You belong to the soil, legally and spiritually. If you thought being born poor today was hard, try being born into a contract that says you're legally tied to a chunk of land and to the man who owns it. You work that land from the moment you can walk until the day you drop. You farm it, sweat on it, pray over it, and maybe even die on it. But you don't own it. The Lord does. Everything you grow, harvest, or build is technically his, and you get the leftovers if he's feeling generous. Want to move? Too bad. You need permission. Want to get married? Also need permission. Want to become a monk to escape this mess? Still need permission. You are, in the kindest sense possible, semi-portable property. And the labor? Endless. You rise before the sun, stumble into the fields, and start working with whatever tools aren't broken or missing. Your back hurts, your hands are cracked, your knees pop when you bend, which is unfortunate because you spend half the day bent double pulling weeds and planting barley. Some days are better. Those are the ones with cloud cover and soft soil. Most days, though, it's either pouring rain or the sun is trying to roast you like a pig on a spit. Too much rain? The crops drown. Not enough? Everything withers. The weather isn't just small talk, it's your entire economic forecast. And it's not just your own family you're trying to feed. The Lord expects his due. That means a share of everything you produce. Grain, vegetables, eggs, wool. If it grows, bleats, or lays, he wants a piece. Refuse, and you're looking at punishment, or worse, eviction. Except you can't actually leave, so it's more like being punished in place until you beg forgiveness. Historians still debate whether serfdom was true slavery or just extremely limited freedom. It's a hot topic. Some argue that serfs had protections. After all, lords needed them alive and working. Others point out that needing a noble's permission to marry feels less like a protected status and more like being on a really depressing reality show called The Bachelor, feudal edition. And heaven help you if the harvest fails. You're already living meal to meal. A bad year means your family goes hungry, first slowly, then desperately. Malnutrition isn't just hunger here. It's a gateway to everything else. Your immune system tanks, your wounds don't heal, and suddenly that tiny scratch on your foot becomes infected and puts you in a fever for days. Diseases like dysentery, typhus, and smallpox love a malnourished body. So do parasites. One odd detail: fleas and lice were so common, they were practically accessories. People joked about them, picked them off in public, and sometimes named them. Yes, named them. You too might someday meet a louse named Little Peter if things go far enough. Even if your health holds up, your food doesn't. The average meal? A piece of hard, chewy bread made from barley or rye, sometimes bulked out with oats, peas, or even bark. You boil whatever vegetables you can grow into pottage, a grayish sludge that tastes vaguely of onions and sadness. Meat is rare unless you catch a rat or commit a crime. And don't even think about hunting deer. That's reserved for the Lord. Get caught poaching, and you'll be punished harshly. Whipped, mutilated, even executed. One man was hanged for stealing a rabbit. A rabbit, which, to be fair, was probably the most protein he'd seen in a month. Your home? Let's call it rustic. It's a one-room hut made from wattle and daub, sticks, mud, and prayer. The roof leaks. The floor is dirt. There's a fire pit in the center, and maybe a small window, though it doesn't open and is covered in oiled cloth. There's no chimney, so smoke just sits in the air like an uninvited dinner guest. You and your family, and probably your goat, all sleep in the same room. Clothing? One tunic, maybe two if you're wildly lucky or good at mending. Wool, of course. Always wool. Scratchy, damp, and not at all flattering. Underwear is optional. Shoes are more like leather flaps you tie to your feet. When they fall apart, and they will, you just keep going barefoot until the next feast day charity handout. Toilets? None. You go in a trench or behind a bush. chamber pots are a luxury, and if you live in a village, those contents often get dumped right into the street. You now understand why medieval shoes had thick soles and why no one breathed through their nose if they could help it. Still, some days aren't awful. There's music, simple, rhythmic, sometimes played on a bone flute or homemade drum. You might get a day off on a feast day, especially if the church calendar says so. Bread might be a little fresher. A neighbor might share a boiled egg. People laugh, even joke. Misery makes strange friends, and serfs stick together. But never forget, you're not free. You can't just pick up and leave. You can't build your own farm on a new hill. You're locked into a system that sees you as a number. You survive because you must, and even then, barely. So as you stagger back toward your smoky, dark hut, legs aching and stomach growling, a single truth settles over you. You don't live in the Middle Ages. You endure them. You push open the creaky wooden door, if it even has a door, and step into your humble medieval home. And by home, we mean the dark, smoky cube of discomfort that somehow manages to be too cold and too hot, too damp and too dry, all depending on where you stand. Welcome to your one-room wonder, a masterpiece of medieval architecture built from sticks, mud, and sheer desperation. There's no foyer, no hallway, no cozy kitchen nook. Just dirt underfoot, soot overhead, and livestock shuffling around somewhere near the bed. That is, if you can call a lumpy straw sack a bed. You'll be sharing it with your siblings, your fleas, and possibly a chicken. Personal space is a concept from the future. The fire burns in the middle of the room, sending smoke up toward the thatched ceiling, which has no chimney, just a hole that sometimes works and often doesn't. The smoke curls down again, like it's changed its mind, leaving you coughing and blinking. Your eyes constantly water, your lungs feel raw, and your clothes absorb the smell of wood smoke like a cursed perfume. There are a couple of small, greasy windows, if any. They don't open. They're not made of glass, but animal horn or oiled cloth stretched thin, just enough to let in a sliver of daylight that highlights how dusty, smoky, and possibly haunted this place feels. Furniture? A stool if you're lucky. A three-legged one if you're really lucky. And then there's the smell. It's hard to describe, but once it hits you, it never leaves. A mix of sweat, smoke, damp wool, manure, and something vaguely sour that might be spoiled milk or just Tuesday. The floor is packed earth, lumpy and cold. Straw is scattered about in a hopeless attempt to soak up spills, which only works until it becomes the spill. Now let's talk comfort. Or rather, the absence of it. Your clothing doesn't help. That itchy wool tunic you've been wearing for weeks, still damp from yesterday's rain, and probably the day before. And let's be honest, you haven't properly washed it since harvest season, because doing laundry means pounding clothes with a stick in a cold stream while praying your fingers don't freeze off. You wrap yourself tighter and glance toward the corner of the room where food preparation happens, if you can call it that. The cooking pot sits suspended over the fire, its sides blackened from years of overuse. Inside, a watery stew bubbles ominously. That's your dinner. Pottage. Again. Always pottage. Pottage is a medieval constant, a thin gruel made of grain, maybe a chopped turnip, and on a festive day, some chopped leeks or stale cheese rind. It's never really finished. You just keep adding to it. Today's stew contains hints of yesterday's dinner and possibly last week's. It's a liquid history of your hunger. Bread, if available, is coarse and hard. Made from barley, rye, or oats. It's chewy, thick, and sometimes full of grit from the millstones. Occasionally, it includes ingredients that shouldn't be there, like mold or tiny rocks. It's not for pleasure. It's for not dying. Meat? Rare. If you have meat, it's probably salted, smoked, or boiled to within an inch of its dignity. And it probably came from an animal that was already half dead when you got to it. You don't waste anything. Feet, tongue, guts. Into the stew it goes. Waste not, want not, and certainly don't complain. Historians still debate how often peasants ate meat. Some records suggest it was more common on feast days or among slightly wealthier farmers. Others argue it was a once-a-year luxury. Either way, if you're expecting roast duck with thyme and honey glaze, you'll want to reset your expectations to rat, pan-fried, with a side of dirt. Oh, and don't forget, you're sharing all of this with animals. In winter, when temperatures plummet and the winds howl like banshees, you bring your livestock inside. Not just for their safety, but for yours. A cow, a pig, a few goats, maybe some chickens, all huddled together with you and your family in a room that barely fits one. It's warm, yes, but also noisy, smelly, and occasionally dangerous. Tripping over a sheep in the dark is a real hazard. So is being pooped on at 3 a.m. You lie down to sleep, pulling your damp wool blanket around you, listening to the sounds of the fire crackling, pigs snuffling, and someone nearby snoring like a dying accordion. You try not to think about lice, or the draft coming through the thatch, or the fact that you haven't had a truly clean glass of water since you got here. Bathing is a luxury, not because water is rare, it isn't, but because the process is exhausting. Heating water means building a fire, finding fuel, carrying buckets, and then maybe having to share the tub with someone else. That's if you have a tub. Most people don't. Washing means splashing yourself with cold water and hoping you don't catch a chill. One quirky historical tidbit: bathhouses did exist in some towns, communal ones. Some even had scented water and attendants, but these became controversial over time, linked to sin and scandal, and were slowly shut down or repurposed. So you wash when you can, and the rest of the time, you just layer on more smells. The night drags on. The fire burns lower. You shiver under your blanket, clutching your tunic closer. There's no light, no heat switch, no running water. Just you, the smoke, the animals, and the hope that tomorrow won't be worse. People in the future might call this quaint. They might point at preserved cottages in tourist villages and say, "How charming." But you know better now. You know that this isn't cozy. It's survival. Everything about this home is designed to keep you barely alive, and it's doing its job. Morning again, or something like it. The smoky haze inside your one-room hut never really lifts, so you judge the time by the smell of reheated pottage and the distant shouting of a neighbor chasing his pig. You're sore. You're tired. And you're starting to understand why medieval art always makes people look slightly annoyed. Today, you're heading into the village proper, but not for fun. There's trouble brewing. Someone's been caught stealing, and the justice system is about to do what it does best: punish first, ask questions never. You're not quite sure what you expect. Maybe a magistrate, a courtroom, a lawyer with a nice wig and a scroll. Think again. Here, justice isn't blind. It's loud, painful, and enthusiastically performed in front of a crowd. There are no police. If someone robs you, you yell, loudly. That's called raising a hue and cry. And if your neighbors don't chase the thief with you, they could get fined. Imagine that. You're legally obligated to join a medieval manhunt or risk losing your bread money. You approach the village square. The crowd is gathered near the pillory. essentially a medieval selfie booth of shame. Today, it's just one man, but sometimes it's two or three, side by side with their heads and hands locked in wooden stocks, open to the elements and to every rotten vegetable within arm's reach. This unlucky soul apparently stole a loaf of bread, worth maybe 12 pennies. But that's about 3 weeks of wages, and in this world, that crosses the line from petty theft to serious crime. The penalty? Hanging. Historians still debate whether medieval justice was uniformly brutal or just wildly inconsistent. Some towns showed mercy. Others hanged you for blinking wrong on a feast day. What is consistent is the church's overwhelming influence. It controls everything: your diet, your wardrobe, your calendar, and your idea of right and wrong. One quirky historical detail: some crimes were punished with forced fashion choices. If you committed adultery, you might be paraded through town in nothing but your underclothes. Gossip too much? You could be sentenced to wear a scold's bridle, a metal cage that fit over your head and tongue. Nothing like humiliation to build community spirit. Trial by jury? Don't hold your breath. Earlier in the period, people faced trial by ordeal. That's a fancy way of saying, we'll torture you and let God sort it out. For example, you might have to plunge your hand into boiling water. If it blisters and becomes infected, you're guilty. If it doesn't, congratulations. God apparently likes you, and you're free to go. Another method: walking across red-hot plowshares. If you make it across without collapsing in agony, you're innocent. Simple. Needless to say, the survival rate was unimpressive. But people believed in it. Pain was proof. Suffering was divine. And the assumption was that if you died during the trial, it was because you were guilty anyway. Convenient. Eventually, these trials fell out of favor. But the replacements weren't much better. Judges could still be corrupt. Proceedings were public, and you had very little chance to explain yourself, especially if you were poor, foreign, or couldn't speak the language, which, remember, is still your situation. Petty crimes could get you the stocks or the pillory. More serious offenses, like forging coins, poaching, or talking back to a noble, might get you branded. Literally, hot iron to the flesh. And that's if you weren't just hanged outright. There are prisons, but you don't want to go there. They're dark, disease-ridden, and not for rehabilitation. They're for holding you until your punishment is decided, or until you die of starvation or infection, whichever comes first. You provide your own food in prison, by the way. No meal served. Better hope your family likes you. You witness a man being dragged away today, not for theft, but for using blasphemous language in the street. Apparently, he insulted a bishop's horse. The punishment? 2 days in the stocks and a fine his family will have to scrape together. He's lucky. It could have been worse. Some towns would have branded his face or cut off his ear. And then there's the category of moral crimes. Playing football, actual medieval football, which was less sport and more riot, could get you fined or flogged. Gambling was frowned upon unless the proceeds went to the church, of course. And don't get caught working on a holy day. That's not just a faux pas. It's an offense against God. You pass a young woman being scolded by a priest. She's been caught wearing shoes that are too pointy. Yes, that's a thing. Fashion, too, was regulated. The church enforced sumptuary laws, rules about who could wear what. Pointy shoes were deemed prideful and excessive. Heaven forbid your toes get too ambitious. Some punishments are designed less for pain and more for humiliation. That's what makes them so effective. The whole village gathers, People whisper. Children laugh. No one forgets the person who soiled the Sabbath, or mocked a noble, or brewed ale with too much foam. Your name is burned into their memory, just like the mark that might be burned into your skin. Historians still question how often these extreme punishments were carried out. Were they rare warnings or daily realities? Records exist, but not always consistently. What is certain is that the system was deeply unequal. If you were rich, you could pay a fine. If you were poor, you paid in blood, sweat, or flesh. You try to stay invisible as the crowd disperses. You're keenly aware that any misstep could make you the next target. Speak too loudly, look too foreign, say something strange, and suddenly you're the one people are whispering about. As you head back toward your smoky hut, you pass the stocks again. A child has placed a cabbage on the prisoner's head. People laugh. It's dark humor, but that's what gets them through. Because in a world where justice is spectacle and survival is a gamble, all you can do is laugh when you're not crying and stay very, very quiet. You're barely a few hours into pretending you're invisible when the call to arms echoes through the village. It's not a bugle or trumpet, just the clang of a bell, followed by the Lord's reeve shouting orders like he owns the wind. Which, in a way, he sort of does. Because you, poor serf that you are, don't just work his fields, you also fight his battles. You don't get a choice. There's no voting on this war, no military exemption forms, no sorry, I've got back pain. You're summoned and you go. The logic is simple. The Lord owns the land. You live on the land. Therefore, you owe him service, including military service. Congratulations. You're a conscript now. They hand you a spear with a wobbly tip and a helmet that looks suspiciously like an upside-down pot. No armor, no formal training, just a strong back and a vague hope that the guy next to you knows what he's doing. You're marching off to fight a war you don't understand, probably over a piece of land you've never seen, claimed by someone you've never met. Maybe it's a border dispute. Maybe someone insulted someone's cousin in Latin. Or maybe it's one of those holy wars, because God, apparently, has very strong opinions about which kingdom controls which river. Historians still argue over whether medieval lords intentionally kept their soldiers ill-equipped to maintain control, or whether logistics were just terrible. Either way, your boots are falling apart, and your pack contains half a loaf of stale bread and some dried peas. The campaign lasts 40 days. That's the standard military obligation for most peasants. If you survive that long, you're technically allowed to go home. But many didn't. Because the first 40 days, that's when all the dying happens. You trudge for hours, then days, sleeping in mud, eating whatever you can, forage or steal. Hygiene is non-existent. Wounds fester quickly. Dysentery spreads faster than gossip. One of the older men tries to treat a foot infection by urinating on it. Another insists that eating raw garlic makes your blood unpierceable. You politely decline both suggestions. And then, your first battle. If you expected choreographed duels and noble speeches, you're in for a disappointment. This is chaos. Shouting, screaming, metal clanging against wood, people slipping in mud, archers firing into crowds, horses trampling anything soft and breakable. There's no real strategy. Most medieval battles resembled angry mobs with weapons. Formations collapse quickly. Leaders shout from behind the lines, and the only rule is to survive. You swing your spear because everyone else is. You duck, you run, you trip. Someone screams your name, or maybe it's someone else's. Blood mixes with rain. You don't remember striking anyone, but your arms are sore and your knuckles are raw. When it's over, You've lost your helmet. You've probably gained fleas. But you're still breathing. Around you, the field is littered with bodies. Men you saw yesterday, joking about turnips. Now they're silent, sprawled across churned earth like broken mannequins. You feel nothing. Or maybe too much. It's hard to tell. Back in camp, you're given a cup of something warm and vaguely alcoholic. You drink it, because why not? It doesn't help the taste of death in your mouth, but it makes you stop shaking. The next day, you bury the dead, with your hands, or with whatever tools haven't been lost. There's no ceremony, no speeches, just digging and muttering prayers you barely remember. Some of the bodies don't even get names. No one kept a list. Commoners rarely make the records. One quirky fact: noble deaths were often meticulously recorded, complete with banners, causes, and mournful ballads. Peasant deaths? Not so much. Your passing is noted only by the absence of your labor. Maybe someone takes over your share of the field. Maybe they don't. But lords die too. Nearly 30% of them, by some estimates, perished in one skirmish or another. Wealth buys armor, but not invincibility. Especially when arrows don't care who you are. And that's just the local conflicts. Zoom out, and the whole medieval world is engulfed in war. Over 370 recorded wars during this 1,000-year period. The First Crusade alone killed nearly 90,000 people at the Siege of Jerusalem. Over the entire Crusade era, somewhere between 1 to 3 million deaths. Then there's the 100 Years' War, ironic name, since it lasted 116 years, where another 2 to 3.5 million died. The Mongol invasions? Up to 40 million lives lost. It wasn't a good century to be human, let alone a soldier. You don't know any of this, of course. You just know that you're tired, your hands are shaking, and your lord seems content with the day's result. You march back home with fewer men than you left with, and fewer illusions than ever before. You return to your village. No parades, no fanfare. Just your field, your tools, and the same fire pit you left behind. If you're lucky, someone patched your roof while you were gone. If not, you'll fix it yourself, with sore arms and a new limp. You sit down by the fire, staring into the smoke. You've survived battle, but you're not sure you've come back whole. War doesn't make you a hero here. It makes you quieter, more cautious. You're not thinking about glory. You're thinking about who'll help you plant barley tomorrow. You're back, bruised but not broken, settling into the rhythm of your grim little routine when something peculiar happens. A nobleman invites you to his manor. Not as a guest, of course. Don't get ideas. But as part of a labor crew moving grain. Still, you catch a glimpse of his world. The bright tapestries, the glazed ceramic plates, the wine, the distinct smell of something metallic. At first glance, it looks like heaven. Finally, food not ladled out of a dented cauldron. Roasted meats, candied fruits, fluffy white bread, goblets filled with dark, rich wine, plates gleaming in the firelight, cups with delicate patterns, bowls so smooth they could have been conjured by magic. You look around and for a moment think, maybe life as a noble isn't so bad. And that's when you realize you're standing in a museum of slow, colorful death. That gorgeous plate, glazed with lead oxide, it makes the surface shiny and easy to clean, which is fantastic, unless you're eating something salty, acidic, or hot. Then the lead leaches into your food and straight into your body. Bon appetit. The wine cup, same glaze, and the wine itself, often stored in lead containers or sweetened with syrup cooked in lead pans. You're sipping vintage neurotoxin with every toast. It's delicious. It's refined. It's poisoning you. Historians still argue how widespread lead poisoning was among the upper classes, but excavated skeletons from wealthier medieval cemeteries, especially in places like Germany and Denmark, reveal elevated levels of lead in bones. Chronic exposure leads to memory loss, abdominal pain, infertility, seizures, and in many cases, death. And let's not forget the kids. Children's growing bodies absorb lead more readily than adults. Affluent families lose children too, and often don't know why. Some simply label it God's will, while unknowingly ladling more stew from their beautifully toxic dishes. It's not just the dishes either. Stained glass windows, lead, coins, lead, roof tiles, lead, rainwater barrels collecting runoff from those rooftops, deliciously infused with, you guessed it, lead, the nobleman's fancy garden, fertilized with ash and waste, often soaked with contaminated water, and that white bread you were eyeing? It's not free of danger either. Most noble households prefer rye flour, and rye carries a fungal hitchhiker, Claviceps purpurea, better known as ergot. When ground into bread, it causes St. Anthony's fire, a condition that leads to hallucinations, convulsions, burning limbs, and, if untreated, gangrene. One day, you're eating a hearty sandwich. The next, your fingers turn black and fall off. One quirky theory? Some historians believe that outbreaks of ergot poisoning are behind medieval dancing plagues, those strange episodes where hundreds of people took to the streets, twitching and dancing uncontrollably, sometimes until they dropped dead from exhaustion. Picture a rave fueled by spoiled grain and divine panic. It's a cruel twist. The poor starve, the rich feast and slowly poison themselves. There's no winning. Even the water in noble homes isn't safe. Wells are sometimes dug too close to latrines, and indoor basins, fancy for their time, can become bacteria breeding grounds. With no understanding of germ theory, nobles rely on scent to judge cleanliness. If it smells okay, it must be okay. Spoiler alert, it's not. You return home from the manor with a stomach full of meat and a creeping headache you try to ignore. Your peasant stew might taste like sadness, but it never made your teeth fall out. There's a weird comfort in knowing you probably won't die from artistic pottery. Still, you've learned something important. Wealth doesn't mean safety here. It means different dangers. The poor die fast, of famine, cold, childbirth, and war. The rich die slowly, of heavy metals, bad science, and untested luxury. Survival isn't guaranteed at any level. It's a lottery no one wants to play. You sit by your fire that night, watching embers curl upward. There's a rat chewing something in the corner. Your water smells a little like moss. Your boots are beyond repair, and yet, strangely, you feel grateful. Because in a world where even fancy soup can kill you, sometimes survival looks like muddy feet and cabbage stew. And now, let's slow down. Let the fire die down to a soft orange glow in your imagination. Let the sounds of your medieval world, the clatter of wooden carts, the distant bell of a chapel, the quiet murmur of a tired village, fade into the background. You're safe for now. The pottage is warm. The roof mostly doesn't leak. And tomorrow's work hasn't started yet. You lie down, straw poking through the thin blanket, and close your eyes to the flicker of firelight dancing across the beams overhead. The lice won't bite for another hour or two. The goats are settling in. And the darkness? It's not frightening anymore. It's just medieval night. Sleep now, time traveler. You've made it to the end.